Welcome to the latest edition of cybersecurity discussions between Ideal Integrations, Blue Bastion, and Henderson Brothers. I'm Michael Stratos from Ideal Integrations, and I have with me Corey Bussard, Luke McOmie from Blue Bastion, Dan Coast, Peter Horne from Henderson Brothers. These roundtables are designed to address critical areas of your security protocols, risk management, and financing strategies in short segments. Today's topic, endpoint protection platforms and endpoint detection and response. Luke, Corey, we talked previously about security in a world of hybrid and remote work. How does endpoint protection play into this?
I think it's critical. When we took people out of the offices, right, kind of the whole aspect around having a perimeter and having this edge went away. Everyone's sitting at home, everyone's working remotely over VPNs if they're doing it semi-right. But it added a layer of complexity because now all of a sudden, the same computer that's being used for people to conduct their day-to-day work is probably or possibly the same computer that their kids are using to play, the latest little video game or Flash application that's come out that they're interested in. So you've got a heightened chance of there being a blend between the personal and the business side of how people typically or traditionally operate. And I can't stress enough that I think that that's really introducing a lot of risk and threat that people are just not thinking about right now.
Yeah, no doubt. Corey? Well, I'll start talking while Corey gets off.
He was on mute.
And, we can address this question again. So, yeah, obviously people working from home opens up a whole other world, Luke, like you said. It's not that the perimeter goes away, it just gets a heck of a lot bigger, right? And you got to plan it out. And there's certainly a lot of other technologies and things that you can use to try to still keep that surface area of risk low, right? Virtual desktops, thin client computing, things of that nature, to keep the perimeter inside, right? And protect the core or your network, from the extremities, from people's home computers or laptops that are even corporate owned, but you end up taking them home and exposing them to somebody's home network that you have no or a lot less control over, right? So the endpoint protection better be very good, and quite frankly, the protecting yourself from yourself, right? Once that device is on a foreign network, how are you going to protect yourself for it, even though it is technically part of your network? Corey?
Yeah, right. I mean, you stole a lot of my thunder right there. So that's all right. You hit most of the points I wanted to say, but also requiring that if they connect into your network, maybe through a VPN, doing a check, do they have the antivirus or solution set that you require as part of that is a major item too. So not only would it be that's the only, like you said, that's the only protection you have in that foreign network. But whenever they attempt to come into your network, ensuring that it does exist on that machine before you allow it. That'd be the only other thing I could add to that.
All right. So what are some thoughts or suggestions an organization should consider when evaluating comprehensive endpoint protection platforms versus traditional? And, there's a lot of things out there. There's legacy signature based, there's newer next gen, there's AI, machine learning, all of those different things. How would you guide somebody on these?
I think a key is to make sure that you are using something that really looks at the heuristics, the actual pattern of how it detects and what it detects, right? The old signature driven vulnerability solutions or specifically like antivirus solutions, they're looking for something that's known, right? It's a signature, a checksum that they're going after, and it's something that is known to be a problem that's already gotten somebody, and that's how they've gotten that signature. That's how you're supposed to protect yourself against it. It's almost like going and getting a COVID test, right? Do I have COVID? That's that signature kind of an approach. Next generation solutions that are really rich are instead looking at the behavior, and there are specific thresholds that get met or exceeded, and that's really what triggers these new next generation solutions to really be able to detect things like zero-day attacks or some of these other types of issues that are coming into an environment where people are using attack tools or frameworks that aren't necessarily being picked up by a traditional signature method, because they're recompiling those attack tools each time they do the attack. So there is no known signature for them to go after.
So
Yeah.
sorry, go ahead, Corey.
I was just going to say, and to go off of that, you know, whenever you're going through your evaluation of those tool sets, making sure that it has many different capabilities in the heuristics department is very, very important. Actually putting those to test, maybe putting them in a sandbox and deploying malware to them to see how they react. And maybe even attempting to change hashes to those to make sure that it isn't just looking at the hash like Luke had just said. It's looking at the behavior of what's firing up. But also making sure that it has some type of ransomware protection and detection as part of the solution. You want to make sure, because that's what we're seeing a lot of today is the ransomware stuff, so that it has some detective capabilities surrounding ransomware. And then understanding how they do it and what the pitfalls of that detective or preventative measure might be, so that you can layer potentially some other actions around that or other protective measures surrounding that. And also understanding the differences between a next-gen AV and an EDR solution, and knowing that there are companies that combine these things into singular agents, right? There are many different companies that do different things, but also understanding a lot of AV companies weigh heavier on one side or the other. They might weigh heavier on preventative. They may weigh heavier on the detective side. So which one are you looking at? Do they care more about detective and less about preventative? Do they care more about preventative and less about detective? So, you know, and then tying that back to what it is that your organization would expect. So we all know that an AV isn't going to stop everything. But if they have a way to detect a lot of things or most things, where they have a lot of capabilities in the preventative, but they mostly weigh heavily on detective, and you're a detective organization where you would rather be able to detect everything, but maybe not, you know, you're not going to be able to prevent everything, maybe that would be the better solution for what you're trying to accomplish.
Or you layer.
Or you layer, yes, absolutely.
Right. No silver bullet, and a multi-layered approach towards security is always, you know, advantageous, right? So this thing between, next-gen antivirus versus something that's more centered around AI or machine learning, those types of things, it's typically, from our perspective, a combination of the two is what's best. Certainly that doesn't always play into, the budget, but, you look for the best solution and see what you can come up with all the factors. So Dan, endpoint protection platforms generally allow an organization to identify patient zero from a security incident. This may or may not involve a significant amount of forensic investigation. Can you talk about how a cyber policy would provide coverage specifically for forensic expenses?
Absolutely. So I guess just to kind of give you kind of an environmental scan of what's going on in the forensics world, you know, we've seen forensic rates really get quite expensive, you know, reaching, you know, $400 or $500 an hour in some cases for forensic work. And so there's a couple of really key things when structuring a cyber policy around forensics. I think, you know, one, a cyber policy contains what we know as first party and third party coverages. First party being you being the breached party, we incur expenses as a result of that breach, and forensics certainly being one very large component of that first party expense in a breach scenario. And so the policies typically provide panel providers to respond to a breach. And what can happen though is that, you know, there may be an organization that is using a different forensics provider to respond to the breach on the front end. And let's say that firm is not a panel provider of the carrier, then we've got an issue of continuity and potentially a file needing transferred over to a different forensics provider. And then that obviously is going to get very messy. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, before a breach and at the renewal of a cyber policy, it's really important to have a discussion with broker to determine, who those panel providers are. Are you comfortable with who those providers are? And if not, negotiate on the front end of the placement of that policy an approved provider. There is flexibility around that. Not all carriers are equal. Some have more flexibility than others on in negotiating and listing other providers that maybe are not on panel, if you will. And other thing to note too, there's sublimiting of cyber coverage if you go off panel. So let's say that you continue down the path of dealing with a non-panel forensics provider. The carrier may say, well, go to the terms and conditions of the policy, and you may have had 3 million of coverage for panel providers. Well, there's either no coverage or $1 million or whatever it may be. So there'd be reduced availability of coverage under that first party bucket of costs. So those are all really important things to think about when placing coverage. So just again, have that dialogue with the broker, make sure the carrier is on board. And if there are if there are providers from a forensics, legal, whatever that perspective may be, that you as the buyer want or need to handle that breach, negotiate it at the front end. Because the last thing you want to do is trying to back into it after a breach.
Yeah, I think that we've touched on this a little bit in other episodes, and I think that there could be an episode dedicated to just that dynamic of when that occurs, because it's not just who's doing IR. It could be a separate company doing incident response. And then typically there's the third aspect that really kind of gets shoved under the rug is the infrastructure portion of this, because there is a heavy amount of infrastructure related tasks that are involved with incident response and then forensics, right?
Yeah.
Infrastructure is preserving evidence for forensics to get it. There have to, whether it's a panel company or non-panel, there is still a transfer of data, typically, all of those things. It's a world way. And so,
you know what often happens too, Michael, is maybe it's a $50,000 retention on that policy, right? So the breach occurs, client says, yeah, it's probably not going to hit $50,000. The retention is our money. So we're going to use our partner. We feel comfortable handling it. Then before you know it, we're at $175,000 in expenses. And now we've got an issue with the carrier and you're off panel. And so that just gets really wonky and things, those should be addressed on the front end.
Yeah, so it goes back to what you said. Having that, getting a policy isn't just, hey, give me a policy. You need to have a discussion. They need to talk to somebody like yourself, that walks them through a day in the life of what this is and what those dynamics are to be prepared and choose the correct partner in those situations to help you, knowing that all three of those aspects need to be covered. So
yeah, and some clients are completely comfortable with that panel and said, that's what they do. They're experts, go with the panel. But a lot of folks say, well, I've got this company over here. They know us. They know our business. They know our people. They know our infrastructure, and they're going to be able to respond more quickly and work more fluidly with our people in a breach scenario. We want to use them. And so there's two schools of thought there.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least from my perspective, that seems to be on the rise more than just, hey, send me whatever, panel companies you have, right? And that's a good thing for people that call in and they don't know and they don't have anybody. You need somebody, and they have somebody that obviously is experienced and they can get you, some help. So,
no doubt.
all right, Pete, any comments on your end?
I've advised about this before. It could be a whole nother episode on its own. The one piece that I have to add is during this early stage, or hopefully before policy renewal, before an incident occurs, you go through your plan on how like attorney-client privilege or some other legal protection can apply to your forensic review, such that if the this incident escalates into some kind of legal issue, you could rely on some type of, I'll say transparent communication on what's actually going on. And you can talk to your people and vendors and everything like that. Even if you use the word breach or incident, you want to make sure that you can be, again, honest and transparent with yourself and not have that come back against you later. Privilege in the legal sense can help you on that. So that's just another thing in advance you can do.
It's funny, I just had this conversation yesterday about being very discerning on when you use the word breach. Don't use the word breach. Event, incident, especially early on when things are going on and you're getting a message out to employees or clients. Don't just arbitrarily use that word. Event, incident, and investigation leads to what ultimately you will call it, right? Because calling it a breach can trigger some of the things that you're talking about.
Forensics has a lot of layers to it, and we could spend hours on this topic.
There you go. It's some food for thought for another episode. So, all right. Any final comments from anybody on the panel? All right. Well, thank everybody for joining us. Thank you, Luke, Corey, Pete, Dan. Appreciate it. I'm Michael Stratos. Stay safe.